This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of December 6th, 2021. And I was really struggling for a topic for this week's podcast. I could do some promotion and that kind of thing, but I really feel like I get to the point where you're in early December, especially this year, and you've probably been promoted and promoted and promoted. Everybody started their sales early this year. Everybody's doing something, to try to get your attention this year because it's a different year than any other one. I mean, I guess they all are, but in the end, this one's specifically pretty different because of the way that last year played out. So I kind of thought about it, and I decided to talk a little bit about the Beatles documentary, Get Back, that's on Disney Plus. Now, if you're interested in this documentary and you care about it, you've probably seen it by now. You probably saw it over Thanksgiving, and then you probably read every review that you wanted to read and saw every interview, and there's just a ton of back stuff on it. And the truth is that, it's an 8.5 hour documentary, and then you could easily watch another 8.5 hours worth of stuff having to do with it because there's just so much out there. So why would you want to listen to a podcast a week and a half later about the very same thing? Because I'm going to come at it from a very different point of view. I'd originally thought about talking about, okay, here's my perspective on the thing. I was very young when the Beatles were a band. And so certainly my teenage and adult years were not shaped by new Beatles music as much as it was shaped by discovering the music that was already out there. But I'm not really going to talk about that too much. I thought, okay, well, we're Solid Signal and we're all about technology. Let's talk a little bit about the technology that was used there and how it is both a good thing and a bad thing. So I'm sure you know the story by now in that, the Beatles had planned on producing a documentary to go along with their potential television special, potential movie, potential concert, potential album. They didn't know. But one of the most respected video directors at the time, and by video, I mean, short music film directors at the time, was hired to get all this stuff. And they got some 160 something hours of footage and, on audio, and then 56 hours of film, which must have been an incredibly expensive thing to do back then. I mean, you couldn't just put up a bunch of GoPros and call it a day. They were shooting a lot of film and a lot of sound. And what came out of it was the film version of Let It Be, which maybe I saw at one point in my youth. I don't really remember. I found a bootleg of it on the internet, and even though the quality of the film was said to be poor in its day, the bootleg is extraordinarily poor, so it's really not worth it. And so don't go looking for it. Now, the film part of it was recorded separately from the sound part of it, so it just must have taken hundreds of hours just to match up the sound with the existing film. And there's about 3 times as much sound as there is film, so that's another whole issue of that. So what came out of it was this really, really amazing looking documentary. Now, okay, it doesn't look like it was shot yesterday, or maybe it kind of does. I mean, I got to say, the computer processing of it, what was done to try to make it look reasonable for today's televisions, almost gives it a look as if it were shot on a cell phone. Just a little bit blurry in the middle and sharp on the edges and stuff like that. But apparently they did a lot of video processing, and then they did a lot of machine learning to try to come up with an audio mix that made a lot of sense. Because remember, they really only had a few microphones, and they were constantly getting drowned out by the musical instruments, which was sometimes apparently on purpose. So the technical part of restoring this was just incredible. Just incredible that they were able to do it. And I guess I don't care so much that it's moving away from reality at that point, because okay, you're reprocessing the audio so that you can hear the people, which means that it's not necessarily what was heard that day, but it's close enough. And microphones never pick up what the human ear can pick up. So this gives a little bit more of an ability to focus on that, and that's okay. But after about 2 weeks, and seeing it now twice, I gotta say there is one thing that begins to bother me. So this is presented as such a clean documentary, such a cohesive kind of thing of, you're just in the room with them paying attention, that it begins to suffer from a typical problem that documentaries have. The big problem with a documentary is that it very rarely documents. There's always a point of view. The point of view of the original film version of Let It Be, which was what all this footage was shot for, was that there was a lot of tension going on and that they really weren't having fun and it was just hard work and they didn't know what to do. And that's been the prevailing narrative for years. Well, the narrative of Get Back, which is really made from exactly the same footage, really exactly the same footage, and yet, they were able to look at it completely different, was, okay, here's four just kind of more or less hardworking, tired people enjoying spending time with each other. And yeah, they kind of bicker because they're locked together for 2 weeks, but that's not the real overwhelming kind of narrative. The overwhelming narrative is that they just enjoyed making music and they had been doing it for so long that they just, it's very hard for them to get through it. And it also turns on its head the narrative that, Yoko Ono kind of broke up the Beatles, which was really kind of a thing we said for probably 2 decades. And it's very uncommon to hear it now, but it's still out there. But what I did find to be a little frustrating as I went on and watched this. So there's a disclaimer at the beginning that more or less says we recorded more audio than we did film, and where we don't have pictures, we're just kind of representing things as best we can. The problem is that they do such a good job of it. You really have to watch, and there are times you can definitely see that the lips sync up with the voice. And so that's really what's happening. But there are a lot of times, and I would say probably, if I had to guess, more than half of the film is made up of, this is where they found some footage that kind of looked like what they were trying to show on film because they only had audio for it. And keep in mind, too, they had one camera. That's all they had going at any given time was one camera, except for the rooftop concert where they very clearly say they had 10 cameras going on. But they had one camera. And so anytime you see a reaction shot, anytime they cut to a different kind of location, and it's not just the same shot framed differently, that's made up. That's not real. So all of a sudden this documentary seems a lot less like a documentary because you could conservatively think that as much as 2/3 of it really isn't showing you what the audio is portraying. And so this is especially important when you're looking at, okay, that part where George is deciding whether or not to leave. Well, how much of those reaction shots were really taking place at that moment? We don't know. And times when, especially anytime you see somebody is smiling or reacting positively to something, where did that come from? How do you know that that's exactly how they felt at that moment? You don't. It ends up basically being a fiction, a much more pleasant fiction, and one that we, as Beatles fans, we enthusiastically embrace because we love the idea that these young people were just enjoying themselves, and we like the idea that they liked making the music as much as we like listening to the music. But we don't know. There isn't any sort of indication of how much of this is actual footage that's being shown at the same time that you're hearing the audio associated with that footage, and how much of it isn't. There's also a question, I think, among some of the more hardcore Beatles fans. It's possible, although I couldn't tell, that they mixed a couple of takes. So in other words, you're hearing the beginning of one song, you're hearing the end of that same song, but it's a different take a couple of hours later. Now that routinely happens with records. I mean, the Beatles did it all the time, but it wasn't being represented as reality. And that's the difference. I'm not saying I didn't like this film. I did. I enjoyed it as much as any other Beatles fan enjoyed it. But it is not an accurate document any more than Let It Be is an accurate document, or even some of the other films the Beatles made, like Help or Hard Day's Night. It is a perspective. It is what Peter Jackson believes and to some degree hopes was going on. I mean, you can't imagine that Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr were sitting there during the 4 years that they edited this thing and just kind of saying, yeah, that's how we felt then. That's how we felt then. And even so, I mean, look, it was 50 years ago, a little bit more, like 52 years ago. And how would they even remember moment by moment? They wouldn't, is the point. And so you don't know, nobody knows. And so it is a fiction. It's a pleasant fiction, but it's as much of a fiction as anything else. And I wish that we could see for sure kind of that. It would be kind of neat if you could see a little bit more. Now, 8.5 hours is a lot, right? 8.5 hours is a lot, but it would also be kind of cool if there were about a 12-hour cut, which was just kind of straight on footage. And if it was only sound, that was just the sound and no picture at all, so that you could get an idea of what was really, really going on. There's still so much more to be studied from that moment in time. And we did learn a lot from what was said. We learned about the early influence of Alan Klein and him coming in, and the way that Billy Preston really kind of calmed all the tempers. I think that would be hard for them to hide. But, you know, there's so much more that can be learned from this, and it's an amazing document. It's not something that was done back then. You did not have these long live streams. You didn't have virtually unlimited recording space for $0. And so it wasn't done. And so it's an amazing thing. But I think that there should be a document of it made available to historians, if nobody else, that really shows even more. Because even an 8.5 hour documentary is leaving just dozens and dozens of hours of information out on the table, and most of it's probably garbage. It's, you know, what do they have for lunch or whatever, but a lot of it probably isn't. I'm glad that it's out there, but I do feel in the end, as much as I enjoyed it, I have to remember that it is a work of fiction based on fact, but still shaped in a way that we can enjoy it. That's it for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. I hope the next couple of weeks are good for you. I will be still around, but may not do podcasts in the last 2 weeks of the year. Haven't decided yet. So at any rate, I will see you in 2022 if I don't see you before.